Hello, STF students, teachers, friends, and family, and welcome to our 2020 STF Virtual Town Hall. Before we get started, take a look at everyone here in the gallery view. I can see Ms. Cheatham and also Ms. Brenny from our Carson chapter. It's great to see all of you guys, and I hope you guys are all having a fantastic day. But now I'd like to recommend that everyone switches over to the speaker view. You could easily access this in the top right corner of your screen. This is going to give you an overall better viewing setting for tonight's event. My name is Uchenna Akano, and I am an STF president at Carson High School. It is great to see everyone here this evening for our first ever virtual STF Town Hall. This is an incredible milestone for our organization as we go into our 21st year. Like, wow, that's even older than I am. Over the years, STF has reached out to tens and thousands of students. This new virtual environment will allow us to reach out to even more people throughout the whole country and even around the whole world and help us advocate for human rights.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexandra and I'm a co-president of STF at Santa Monica High School, and I'd like to share a plan for this evening. We're here to inform ourselves how we can vote for human rights in this unprecedented election season. As you all know, we have a human right to participate in our government and in free elections, but it is also our responsibility to exercise that right and to be informed. This fall, student task force members have been working tirelessly to make sure our friends, families, and community members know the power they have by voting. We've been hosting voter registration drives, recruiting poll workers, and organizing educational presentations on topics such as voter suppression, all in an effort to make sure everyone's voice is heard and their vote is counted in this election.
Our plan for the hour includes our good fortune to hear from Justin Connolly, HRW Senior Director of Southern California, about the work Human Rights Watch is doing to protect the voting process. Justin will be followed by a discussion of 3 propositions, especially important to STF because of our age and also because STF has worked so hard on many juvenile justice issues. Our guest speakers will discuss the pros and cons of the 3 propositions and then respond to our questions. First, please meet our good friend, Justin, a longtime advocate for STF and young people working to protect human rights.
Thank you, Akano. So I'm going to go back to gallery view because I love looking at all of you. You're all amazing and inspirational. And, you know, Student Task Force has been around for 21 years and still just each year continues to inspire and amaze me. You know, you've advocated for rights of refugees, asylum seekers, criminal justice reform, education, gun violence. And I'm just, again, delighted to be part of this effort to make sure that voting, that everybody has the right to vote. As you saw in that video, Human Rights Watch is very deeply engaged in this, maybe for the first time in the United States. We've done it in other countries for years. It's very humbling to be doing it in the United States. Usually the work that we're doing in the United States is around criminal justice reform, immigration or national security, poverty, economic inequality, and racial discrimination. But we find here in 2020, we're doing voting rights. A big piece of that, as you saw, is COVID-19. You know, how does that impact our right to vote? We did a big study in 5 states on primaries and what it looked like for primaries, because that was going to foreshadow what happens in November. We monitored the number of polling centers, where they're located. You know, are there enough? We saw in Texas that they were going to only have 1 in the entire Dallas County, I think it was. We looked at personal protective equipment, like are people feeling safe when they go? Are the poll workers safe? You know, so many of our poll workers are older, and making sure that everybody has good personal protective equipment and not requiring voters to bring their own. Like that might be considered a poll tax. It can be expensive to outfit yourself if there's a barrier to coming in if you're not fully gowned with masks and gloves and so forth. You probably have seen that there's a huge misinformation campaign about mail-in ballots. In California, we're all over mail-in ballots. But in other states, you know, where they're trying to tinker with the margins, maybe calling into question what mail-in ballots, if they're vulnerable to fraud, is that really true? And it turns out not to be true. Big concern about intimidation tactics at the polls. You saw the militias talking about, protecting polls. But if a bunch of armed people show up at a poll place, will people stay away? So these are some of the things around access to voting rights. And then finally, as we've heard, we'll be talking about 3 California ballot propositions. Human Rights Watch never endorses one candidate or one party ever, under any circumstances. We guard our neutrality that's like one of the most rising values of our organization. However, when it comes to bills and propositions that intersect our work, we are extremely opinionated, as you will discover later. So, and then finally, we're looking at what you individually can do to protect your right to vote. And a lot of this, we're about to see a huge surge in the number of mail-in ballots because of the pandemic. Little technical things like, do people's signatures match on their application for the ballot and then the ballot that's received? Those things can actually disqualify ballots. And if people don't know that, they may, just inadvertently have their ballots not counted. So all of these things are topics of discussion for today. And so I just thank you for the opportunity to talk you through some of it. And again, good on all of you for coming here at 75 people at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night to learn how to protect your right to vote. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin, for supporting STF and human rights. I'm Natalia Wies, an STF leader at Palisades Charter High School, and I'm so proud to be a poll worker this election. I just had my training, and I might be the person helping you at the polls on November 3rd. With everything going on, you may not have spent much time thinking about your ballot, or if you have, you may have been focused on the presidential election. It's important to do your research on all local, state, and federal candidates running for office. Here in California, elections also mean voting on ballot propositions. This year, there are 12, and we are highlighting 3 of them this evening. About 3/4 of Californians say the wording for propositions is too complicated, but an overwhelming majority support the state's ballot initiative process, the ability to directly change public policies. In California, a ballot proposition can be a referendum or an initiative measure that is submitted to voters to decide upon. If passed, it can alter articles of the state's constitution, codes, or statutes. Ballot propositions can be placed on the ballot either by the California State Legislature or via petition signed by registered voters. They must be approved by voters before they can take effect.
Hello everyone, my name is Abdullah Rafiq and I'm from Sierra Canyon School. And I want to tell you about some of our amazing guest speakers tonight. So first of all, we're really honored to have California State Assemblywoman Dr. Shirley Weber with us today. Dr. Weber was the author of Assembly Constitutional Amendment number 5, and also helped get Proposition 16 on the ballot. And she will be speaking to us in support of Proposition 16. And speaking about propositions, for Proposition 17, we have Esteban Nunez and Jose Gonzalez, 2 members of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition who have personally experienced disenfranchisement and know what it means to lose the right to vote, which is an amazing, and it's really amazing that we get to hear them today. And also, our third and amazing guest speaker, we have Ryan Beam, who is also a teen, so that's really awesome to see. He is an active advocate for Proposition 18, and he's returning to STF from Northern California to argue for its passage. We can be more informed about our ballot choices by having these amazing speakers with us who have really lived the issues that they are about to discuss. So, time to get going on our 3 propositions. So I'd like to hand off the mic to Logan Evans to keep us going. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Logan Evans, and I'm introducing Proposition 16 on the official ballot for the general election. Proposition 16 allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. This is a legislative amendment. It was put on the ballot by the state legislature in Sacramento. If you vote yes on Proposition 16, it means state and local entities can consider race, sex, color, ethnicity, and national origin in public education, public employment, and public contracting to the extent allowed under federal and state law. A no vote on Proposition 16 means the current ban on the consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, and national origin in public education, employment, and public contracting would remain in effect. California State Assembly member Dr. Shirley Weber, author of Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5, which was the bill that placed Proposition 16 on the ballot, will give us her arguments for a yes vote on Proposition 16. Brenny Dale, Human Rights Watch's Student Task Force assistant, will let us know about the opposition's arguments to Prop 16. We will have time for one rebut.
Thank you. Very happy to be here with you this evening, and I'm amazed to see all these wonderful faces in the evening, all these young folks who are interested in voting and politics and those kinds of things, which is really encouraging and amazing. And we're obviously in very difficult and challenging times with the election upon us and so many obstacles. And yet I continue to be heartened by the fact that I see so many people in line, determined to vote, spending hours and hours voting. And I think that is just amazing. We haven't seen that since 2016 when Obama ran, 2008 actually, in the first election where people stood for hours and hours to vote. So which says when people have something to vote for, they will definitely vote. And you're setting a good model in order to be able to do that. I have voted on the last 13 elections presidential elections without missing a one, because voting is fundamental to my family since we were from Arkansas, and my grandfather did not get a chance to vote at all during his lifetime because of the laws of discrimination. So I firmly believe in voting and the power of voting. Proposition 16 is an effort to repeal something called Proposition 9 that most of you were too young to remember. 24 years ago, California passed an initiative that put a ban on consideration of any kind of race or gender in the area of education, employment, and contracting. And affirmative action was an initiative that was signed into law, I think by President Johnson, that basically said we needed to make an affirmative effort to try to level the playing field. And we need to make an affirmative effort to try to create equal opportunity and access, with a recognition that racism, sexism exist in our society and therefore creates unequal situations for individuals. And so cities and counties and states could basically put together programs that would hopefully level the playing field, address the issues. They couldn't discriminate themselves, and they could not do quotas. In other words, you have to have a certain number of people. They didn't do any of that. So as a result, it exists right now still in 41 other states. California is only one of 9 states that eliminated the ban. They eliminated equal opportunity and access by repealing affirmative action in those days. And so now we're trying to restore affirmative action back to California. Some would ask, what has happened in the 24 years since that bill passed, since Proposition 209 came into place? Well, the very first year we saw that the enrollment in many of our universities declined immensely. I think there was one Black student in law school the year that that Prop 209 went into effect. Since then, we've seen continually the decline in opportunities that are there. We look at our business communities, and when in the 90s, women basically did 40% of all the contracts and in San Diego, women and minorities. Right now it does 1.5%. So it's dropped from 40% to 1.5% because of the old boy network that those who get continue to get, and there's no effort to do outreach and support for those who are not already getting the contract. So we see that in San Diego, we see that in LA with the large ethnic population, only 2% women, 2% Latino, and 0.5% African American do contracts with the city, and that's statewide. And so what's happened is over the years we have the inability to create things that level the playing field for those, given the fact that our society is still unequal, that we can't somehow or another do that because of the fact that we can't do anything that might consider race or gender in our process of creating the level of playing field that's there. So this bill would basically restore affirmative action back to California so that we would come along with the other 41 states and basically have the opportunity to do that. It is not a mandate. It does not, you don't have to do it, but it's one of the tools that a city or county or state can do if they discover that they have a problem, they have a challenge. Right now, we can't do programs for women in STEM education, even though we have an issue that women are not adequately represented in our STEM programs. We cannot actually do a program focused upon women because that would be discriminatory against men. And so as a result, we then do a general program. And sometimes we get women interested, sometimes we don't. But we can't focus on gender issues when we know that their gender issues are the foundation upon which the discrimination exists. So I'm going to leave it at that in terms of this. We're working very hard on, yes, on 16, an extremely large coalition of supporters, all of the statewide elected officials, the governors, the mayors, our chambers of commerce, all of those groups are actively involved, the University of California's regents, the Board of Trustees of CSU, the community colleges, all of them recognize the tremendous importance of this, especially in light of what we're facing in the streets right now and the inequality and the injustices that we see in our society, that we have to do something to basically make an effort to try to correct the inequalities and give everyone an equal opportunity and access. So I'm going to stop at that. I know I have 10 minutes or something and give you a chance to ask questions.
Fabulous. Thank you, Dr. Weber. So hello, everyone. My name is Brenny Dale, and I'm going to be providing some counter arguments to Proposition 16 to round this out for us. So opponents of Proposition 16 say, in 1996, 55% of California voters decided to prohibit state and local governments from discriminating against or granting preferential treatment to individuals or groups on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the operation of public employment, education, or contracting. Prop 16 would repeal this decision and would ultimately lead to discrimination of various groups. Opponents also say that equal rights are fundamental. Prohibiting preferential treatment based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin is a fundamental part of the American creed. It's there in our Constitution for all of us, now and for future generations. Even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that all people must be free from discrimination and are equal before the law. We also have a right to desirable work and join trade unions, as well as a right to equal education. By mandating college entrance or hiring quotas based on race or gender, that means that not everyone has an equal opportunity to be selected, or that someone less qualified might be hired simply because of their race or gender. Proposition 16 would be a step backwards on all of these rights. Another counter argument is that we should help those who really need it. Not every Asian American or white is advantaged. Not every Latino or Black is disadvantaged. Our state has successful men and women of all races and ethnicities. Let's not perpetuate the stereotype that minorities and women can't make it unless they get special preferences. Furthermore, opponents say, currently, state universities can give a leg up for students from low-income families or students who would be the first in their family to attend college. The state can help small businesses started by low-income individuals or favor low-income individuals for job opportunities. If Prop 16 passes, the University of California would again be free to give a wealthy lawyer's son a preference for admission over a farm worker's daughter, simply because he's from an underrepresented group. That's unjust. Also, one of the reasons voters got rid of affirmative action in 1996 was because the state had to maintain costly bureaucracies that required preferential treatment in public contracting based on a business owner's race, sex, or ethnicity. One study showed that Caltrans contracts saved 5.6% when no longer required to consider a business owner's race, sex, or ethnicity. If the savings from other government contracts are anywhere near that, repealing this constitutional provision could cost taxpayers many billions of dollars. With these social and financial arguments in mind, Dr. Weber, would you like to respond to some of these points?
Most definitely. First of all, I think it's important to understand that quotas are illegal. So the idea, the thought that we're all of a sudden going to go back to quotas is illegal. It's been declared illegal, and we've not had quotas in California. When we talk about the money saved from contracting, the federal government still has affirmative action. And when you do contracts in the state of California, you still have to keep the data on who they are, the women that are there. And so you have not gotten rid of the whole issue of collecting data. We still do it at the state level. We do it at the local city level. We do it everywhere because that is required to do. When we start talking about, so when one says that we're going to save billions of dollars as a result of taxpayers, that is not true. The LAO, which is our Legislative Analyst Office, did an analysis that's in the ballot that talks about what would this cost. And basically they discovered that there really is no cost, that the cost is negligible, that most of the states know how to do in hiring. They've already collected data. They know how to put together programs. So it's not really a big cost factor that's there. Plus it provides equal opportunity for those who traditionally have not had contracts. So when we start talking about income inequality, that's there, that's a part of it. It's nice to talk about the fact that all people are created equal, and we believe that, but we know that in practice, there's difficulty that's there. They often say that we want to be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And I always say that is absolutely correct. That is one of Martin Luther King's phrases, but it was a phrase taken from his dream speech. It is what he was dreaming of, not what his reality was. And he realized that in order for him to get to the place where we would all be judged in that same manner, that we'd have to do some extraordinary things to basically level the playing field. And so when we talk about all the things that are there are no quotas. There's no discrimination against anyone. It is an optional program. It's not required. There's no cost for cities to do the program if they choose not to. And it does not lower standards. It does not allow folks in who didn't get in. But equally important, when this bill was passed by by the individuals that were there, there are preferences in the society, and we know that. And oftentimes they're not necessarily preferences for kids who are poor. If you're a benefactor, if you're an alumni, if your parents give a lot of money to the university, if you're a member of a university's board of trustees, you get your kids in school. And in fact, when the University of California Regents supported Prop 209, they refused to give up their own preference of allowing any of their relatives or friends to come to the University of California. A motion was made, and they would not let their preferences go. Yet they have the audacity to talk about poor people or kids who are behind having some type of preference. So we know their preference is given to society, that is there. And it's often done for those who have resources and not for those who don't. But many of the arguments about how it's going to have a negative effect, we haven't seen it. We didn't see that before Prop 209 passed. We've not seen it in any of the other states. What we have seen is an increase in people basically getting into and jobs and contracts and a much more diverse workforce. We've also seen our universities continue to flourish, and our universities are going to demand that we have diversity. And that's one of the reasons why they are working so hard to make sure the Proposition 16 passes, because they want a university that looks like the faces of the folks I'm looking at right now. That is a diverse population of all students, because that's the world we live in. And if we're going to have a better California, it'll be because we'll have equal opportunity and access for all.
Thank you, Dr. Weber.
Thank you so much. You guys be sure to vote. I love seeing these students wanting to vote. It's inspiring, absolutely inspiring.
I think we're now going to open it up for questions. So if you have any questions, please send them to Kristen in the chat. Okay, we have a question from the audience. Isn't Proposition 209 discriminatory because it bans the consideration of race and gender?
You mean Proposition 209, the one that was there before? It is somewhat discriminatory, because not so much that, not only because it bans it, but it retains a system that is a system determined by race and gender. So you have a system that is discriminatory, and then you ban any efforts to try to get rid of it, because all of a sudden now you want an equal world, that you create and you sustain the racism and the discrimination that's there. And that's why we have not seen any better situation for individuals after 24 years of this failed experiment with Prop 209.
Fabulous, thank you. We have another question from the audience asking Dr. Weber, what is the most common reason for opposition to Prop 16 that you hear?
Well, I think you list them all. That we're going to see that we have a small group of immigrants who believe that they're going to be discriminated against, that we're going to see unqualified people get in, and so forth and so on. Well, interestingly enough, when we look at the data for the last 24 years, we have seen no increase in Asians getting into the university. That was a big issue. Asians are going to be discriminated against, and they're not going to get in the university. Under Prop 209, there has been no increase in that. And in fact, we continue to discriminate because we only look at one pot of Asians, and yet we fail to look at our Hmong, our Vietnamese, our students from Laos. We don't get our entire Asian population. Our Filipino population is low. So we're not able to focus on those groups and encourage them to go to the university that's there. So the number one thing we get is that somehow or another, this is going to do that to the university. The interesting thing is that no one addresses the economic issue that is there. And mainly because when Prop 209 was funded the first time, it really was funded by the building industry. And they're the ones who benefited the most. They're the ones who took contracting from minority and women from 40% in San Diego down to 1.5%, from almost 50% in LA down to 2% for women, 2% for Latinos in such a diverse population. So what happens is nobody wants to talk about the money part, the fact that that the jobs and the contracts and the resources that are there that help to create the diversity in economics. Everybody focuses only on the educational piece, which really has been an issue that has been resolved over the years, and we've figured out ways to kind of help level that playing field. But when we start talking about the economics of California and we start seeing the tremendous poverty and disparity that's there, when you start looking at those contracts of how they have fallen in 24 years, women ought to be outraged because they're the main group that has lost out as a result of Prop 209. The women's population in terms of contracting has just plummeted in terms of city contracts and county and state contracts. And that's how you stabilize your business. If you're going to start a business and you get a contract with the city, you get a contract with the county, that stabilizes your business to be able to grow and to expand in other areas. And we've seen that plummet. And so everybody focuses on these little issues of, did this poor person get in school? Did this not? And the issues, we need to expand the number of seats in our universities. We know that. That's the real issue. But we've not seen a group that as a result of that, the Asian group has been disadvantaged. And in fact, the Asian population has taken real interest in this because what they've discovered is that despite the fact of what they've done, that they're 30% of students at the university, they have no deans in law school. They have no deans in med school, despite going in those places. They have no deans in engineering, despite being there. And they have almost no one on these corporate boards. So they have had a ceiling set for them as Asians in California. And they have not gone beyond a certain level, despite all the training that they have, because they've been discriminated against in those areas. And without our ability to look at that data and fashion programs for it, we continue to do the same thing over and over. And so as a result, that's the issue that people raise, but they fail to look at the real impact of Prop 209 and what good things will happen as a result of voting for 16.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weber, for joining us. Could we please get a round of applause?
Well, thank you all. Thank you guys for what you're doing. I'm excited about the leadership of tomorrow. It's great. I should say the leadership of today, is you guys are voting and you're taking care of business. And I'm excited. So thank you so very much. Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Gil. We'll introduce our next proposition.
All right, thank you so much. So now we are going to move on to Proposition 17. My name is Izzy Gill, and I am introducing Proposition 17 on the official ballot for the general election. So Proposition 17, what is it? It restores the right to vote after the completion of a prison term. So it restores the right to vote when someone is on parole. This was put on the ballot by the state legislature. So if you vote yes on Prop 17, it means people on state parole who are U.S. citizens, residents of California, and at least 18 years of age will be able to vote as long as they register to vote. A no on Proposition 17 means people on state parole would continue to be unable to vote in California. Esteban Nunez, recidivism, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, Coalition's Director of Advocacy, will give us his arguments for a yes vote on Proposition 17. And Jose Gonzalez, hashtag yes on Prop 17 fellow with Anti-Recidivism Coalition, will share the arguments opposing Proposition 17. So go ahead, Esteban Nunez, please. Thank you.
So Prop 17 really is about moving us away from a system that ostracizes individuals into one that is more inclusive and embracing of people when they come home. You know, denying people the right to vote who have completed their prison sentence, who are home-raising families, who are paying taxes, and who contribute to society in a positive and meaningful way is really demeaning to them and ostracizing to them. You know, I came home 4.5 years ago, met with my parole officer. It's one of the first things you have to do. He's going through the list of things that my restrictions, essentially, what things I can't do. And I told him, you can add whatever you want on the list. I'm not even going to jaywalk. And I was very serious. And he looked at me, started laughing. He's like, what are you going to do? What's the first thing you're going to do? I said, I'm going to go get steak and shrimp. He started laughing. And then I said, I'm also going to register to vote. And then I was confronted with the harsh reality that I was unable to vote. And he said, you can't vote. And I looked at him very perplexed and remember the feeling of being disconnected from society. When you're in prison, you feel very disconnected from society. You feel, even though you're still in California, you feel like you are in a different universe. You feel like you are just so far distant away from it. For me, how I coped with it was I read 3 newspapers a day, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the LA Times. And it was a way for me to still feel connected, a way for me still to be afloat on current events. And so when I was told I couldn't vote, it felt like, I remember thinking like, I just finished my prison term. Like, I'm a citizen. I have to pay taxes. I'm counted in the census. Why can't I vote? And it's just the law. The confusing part about the law is anybody so parole supervision is the only form of supervision that denies a person the right to vote. If you are on probation, you can vote. If you come out on federal probation or federal parole, you can vote. But if you come out on state parole, you cannot vote. So we have a sliver of the supervision population, roughly 53,000 people, who are unable to vote right now. In a time where we are really striving to reform our system to be more equitable, to be more embracing, to really just see people for the humans that they are. It is wrong to deny somebody the very basic democratic right of voting. These are individuals who are paying taxes. They're people who are a part of the community. I always I make this comparison a lot. If you move into a new neighborhood, and your neighbors come out and they greet you with baked goods, you're going to feel invested in that neighborhood. You're going to feel like you're a part of it. You feel like you belong. Now, if you move into a neighborhood and your neighbors are screaming profanities at you, you're not going to feel very connected to them. And it's the same thing here. We have an opportunity to really promote public safety, because I'm going to tell you, when people feel invested in their community and they feel like they are a part of their community, a part of the fabric of community, they're not going to want to harm that community. Now, if you feel like if you're going to ostracize somebody and continuously demean them, it's very hard for a person to feel invested in that community and invested in their growth. The other thing is, like, we're also talking about parents. A lot of people think about, national elections or federal elections and statewide elections. Like, let's bring it back and let's talk about county-wide elections. We're talking about parents who come home as parents. Jose's a father. I've known Jose a long time, sorry. But Jose's a father. Like, he can't partake in county elections and can't say how the money is going to be allocated in his county and who's can't vote for school board commissioners. So it's like, in a time where we really want to promote the humanity of individuals and we really want to see people for who they are, we have a population that we have denied the very basic democratic right. In order to vote, you have to feel invested in your community. In time of COVID too, you are solely relying on your representatives. Our ability to advocate on our own behalves on an individual level is very limited right now. So we are relying on our representatives to represent us. Now, we have 50,000 people who are not represented at all, because they don't have a vote to cast, because they can't partake in the very basic civic duties that we all have before us. I will say, when I first got the opportunity to vote, it was very empowering. It was very restoring for me. It felt like, for the first time in my life, I belonged to a community, like I belonged to something. And it really gave me this fuel inside, because I feel like everybody should have that right. Everybody should be able to feel like they are a part of society and that they are intrinsically tied to society. And right now, how we have discriminated against this population, and by the way, like, racial biases obviously exist in our criminal justice system. 3 out of 4 men that leave prison are minorities. So we are essentially marginalizing minorities who are coming out of the incarceration system and denying them the right to vote. And so, you know, we can also talk about generational resentment, right? Like if you don't see your parents vote, you start to resent the system. So if people are coming home from prison, they're not able to vote, you know, their kids are seeing that and saying, why are you discriminated against? Why aren't you able to vote? But you know, you're doing all this stuff with your life. You're giving back to the community. You know, you're working on criminal justice reform. Like, why can't you vote? And it's like, oh, well, society has told me I'm not able to because I'm just not adequate enough to. And you know what that does to somebody's psyche is very belittling. And you know, Prop 17 is really about promoting public safety through restoring people's civic duties and democratic rights to vote.
Hi. It's very difficult to follow someone like Esteban. However, anytime I have the chance to have this type of rebuttal, especially with him, it's always I always look forward to it, even though I'm obviously for Prop 17 and I'm pro for it. Civic duties, civic obligations, public safety, those are all wonderful phrases and words, but that's something that also has to be earned, I guess you could say. Someone who has been sentenced to prison is obligated to serve out their whole sentence. This includes the physical and the temporary, I guess you could say, attachments that they have to the state in order for them to prove that they are able to join and participate in not just obligations, but the privileges of someone who has not committed a crime, someone who is a person of outstanding standing, I guess you could say, of the city, of the state, of the country. With that, I think that's the only thing I could say, because it's very difficult for me to try to not answer my own my own I guess cons, you could say. So I could open it up for questions now.
No, and you know, I'll just add, you know, you'll hear opponents say, you know, to Jose's point, like, you know, why should people who committed, you know, criminal acts be allowed to vote? Well, they're going to be able to vote at some point. You know, it's like we have an opportunity to allow them to feel a part of society and invested in society when they first come home. Why would we not do that? You know, California also currently lags behind 19 other states, including and Washington, D.C. You know, you saw Florida, a red state, pass Amendment 4 with 64%. And I think that speaks to how deep of an impact this has, right? You know, when people say, why should criminals be allowed to vote? I always say, I made a horrible decision when I was younger, and I deserve to go to prison, you know, to be clear. But I am not the person that I was when I made that decision. And that decision is not a reflection of who I am as a person or individual. So to say that, you know, you are going to be judged by the worst decision that you've made in your life and that will forever define you is falsified. You know, Jose has done amazing work, you know, he's working for WB, you know, say like, I can't even get a job at WB, and still can't vote, mind you, is a father, can't vote. And, you know, these are people who, and Jose worked for Human Rights Watch, he worked for the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, you know, in a time where we are really trying to strive towards restorative justice, you know, it doesn't get more restorative than the work that Jose has done, you know, and here's an individual, a father who can't vote, and has done everything in his power to give back. So to say that, you know, Jose would be, or myself, we are, you know, defined by our worst action is false, because we've proven that we aren't the people that we were, and we aren't the people that made those. We made those decisions, but they're not. We're not defined by them.
Okay. Thank you, Esteban and Jose. So, well, we were going to ask one quick question. I know we have to keep moving, but the question is, how would you respond to someone who says that the severity of the crime should affect whether or not someone can vote after completing their sentence?
The severity of the crime, that's understandable. That's a valid perspective from someone who has that perspective. However, given that that person has already completed their sentence, when you are sentenced in the court of law, the actual punishment is for them to remove you from your family, remove you from the community that you may have harmed, remove you from your freedom, which is the most important thing that we all have as, not just as human beings, but as Americans, I guess you could say. And once you complete that, you are deemed eligible or deemed worthy of returning back to society. You're deemed eligible and worthy and obligated to pay taxes, to get a job, to not be continue to be a drain on the state, so to speak, to adhere to your responsibilities, to be disciplined in these responsibilities, and to still be told that you are not worthy of having your voice heard, of not worthy of your opinion when it comes to something as trivial but as important as school zone or school representation for your local school district, is not only hurtful, but it's also a constant reminder that this country has a lot to work on when it comes to inclusiveness of everyone, as far as their word, not looking at them by the color of their skin or their past actions. And for someone to say that, I would say, just imagine yourself being constantly judged for the worst mistake you may have made, regardless of the severity of one or the other. That's not the point. But imagine if someone was constantly reminding you of your mistake, and then constantly reminding you that no matter what, you will never live that down, and you will never be considered a human, I guess, 100% human, 100% an American.
And if I may, I just want to add on to what Jose is saying. I get this question a lot. People, I'll take lifers as an example. People who, are served life sentences and have come home. Those are individuals that potentially could be barred from voting for the rest of their lives, for one. Two, these are individuals that had to prove to a board commission that they are, quote unquote, rehabilitated and not a risk to public safety. These are, and convincing a board commission, which are complete strangers for individuals. So for one, like, just to back up a little bit, to do introspective work in a place where your number one issue is your safety, and to every day walk out thinking like, am I gonna live or die? But to be able to find a place to be vulnerable and to be able to actually do that introspective work in a environment like that speaks lengths to the amount of work that person has to do, and then go in front of a board and prove to that board in complete vulnerability, mind you, that they have changed, and talk intricately about that decision that they made, and then talk about the growth that they've made, speaks lengths to that individual. They have to earn their way out. And I think that's important. The other important piece is those individuals, the lifer population, have a 1.3 recidivism rate. That's 1.3 compared to the 64% recidivism rate that we have in California. And I think that speaks to how hard it is for individuals like this to prove to a board that they are not a risk to public safety. So to go forth and say that because a person made a decision some time ago and has done the work that, mind you, a lot of us haven't done, I can't say that I've done all of the work, to prove to a board that they are rehabilitated and not a risk to public safety, then to come home and be told you could potentially be on parole for the rest of your life and you may never be able to vote, is wrong. Because if we believe in forgiveness and we believe in redemption, then everybody who's not a risk to public safety and who is a productive member of society deserves the right to vote.
Thank you, Esteban, and thank you, Jose. I think your perspectives are so vital, so thank you so much. I would now like to introduce Angel Marcario Flores, and he is going to introduce Proposition 18.
Hello, I am Angel Marcario Flores, and I am introducing our final discussion of propositions on the official ballot for the general election on November 3rd, 2020. Proposition 18 amends the California Constitution to permit 17-year-olds to vote in primary and special elections if they will turn 18 by the next general election and be otherwise eligible to vote. This proposition can impact many STFers. This is a legislative amendment put on this ballot by the state legislature in Sacramento. If you vote yes on Proposition 18, it means that the 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the time of the next general election may vote in the primary and any special elections preceding the general election. A no vote on Proposition 18 means that no one younger than 18 years of age may vote in any election. Ryan Beam was 11 days too young to vote in this year's primary and got involved with this initiative in 2019. Ryan will give us his arguments for yes vote on Proposition 18. Aiden Reading is the president of STF at Valencia High School and is on the debate team. He believes everybody should strive to understand the opposing sides of an issue. He will let us know about the arguments opposed to Proposition 18. Ryan speaks first, followed by Aiden.
Right now in California, if you turn 18 between March and November in an election year, then you, along with me and 200,000 other Californians, are trapped in this electoral gray zone. We'll be old enough to vote in the general election, but at the same time, we're too young to vote in the corresponding primary. So we still get our ballots in November. I voted yesterday, but we don't get a say in who's on our ballots. I couldn't vote in March. So what this means is that despite the fact that we have an equal stake in the outcome of the election, we don't have an equal say. Our votes are effectively, they're reduced to rubber stamps on nominees who we didn't get a say in choosing. And our vote is weaker than the votes of others, which those of you in STF would know isn't quite in the spirit of Article 21, Section 3, equal suffrage and equal free voting procedures. So what Proposition 18 does is it eliminates the gray zone. It says that if you're 18 by election day, you are automatically eligible to vote in the corresponding primary. And I think that change is common sense, it's constitutional, and it is actually commonplace as well. You'd think that this is some weird California proposition, but 18 other states already do this and have been doing it for decades. States like Ohio since the 1980s, and Illinois, and even Mississippi, of all places, beat us to the punch on this one. That's Mississippi beating California on an enfranchisement issue. That just isn't right. So these states are doing this because they recognize that these primary elections are taking place months and sometimes nearly a full year before the general election. And that leaves a lot of people out. The right to vote, it implies the right to fully participate in what has become this modern day extended election cycle. So this is really kind of a procedural thing. It's a glitch that's being fixed state by state. It's not some radical move to lower the voting age outright, which remains a pretty unpopular idea. And the unfortunate thing is that for Prop 18 is that it's very easy to see the words 17 and vote and think this is something it's not. The real threat to Prop 18, I think, isn't the organized opposition, it's that people will vote against this without fully understanding that nuance. Last year, I published op-eds in the LA Times and the Sacramento Bee, which encouraged lawmakers to get this on the ballot. And the most popular misconception among readers, and I know because there were comments, was that this was some crack effort to lower the voting age. So if Prop 18 has a greatest weakness, it's that at first glance, any headline or proposition title about it kind of makes it sound, to a lot of voters, I found, less like the mundane correction to a subtle injustice that it is, and more like a potentially unconstitutional power grab by the Democrats, which it's not. Again, look at Mississippi. So Prop 18, I think, is worth a yes vote on merit of its fairness alone, but there's also a compelling case to be made that Proposition 18 would make for a healthier democracy. You vote in high school, you're more likely to become a lifetime voter. That's what the science seems to indicate. So the proposition's opponents have suggested that we're too easily influenced by our teachers and parents to be allowed any more than this sort of partial participation that we're already granted. And I just say that clearly the authors of that argument, they don't spend much time around people our age. Rebellion's kind of, that's the whole thing. And even if we were in the thrall of like sinister civics teachers, that doesn't change the fact that those of us in question still have a right to vote in the general election a few months later. There's not going to be a whole lot of development in the interim period, and as long as we're going to have some say, it seems like we may as well have a full say. And that brings us back to the issue of fairness. So Prop 18 is fundamentally about letting those of us young people who are 18 on election day have an equal say throughout the election cycle. And it's about joining the 18 other states that have beat us to the punch on this one. That's why I voted for Proposition 18. And I hope those of you who can vote in the next several weeks also consider it.
Awesome. Hello. Thank you, Ryan. You did an incredible job. I would first like to just start off by saying I personally, you might not be able to tell this in my speech, but I don't agree, or I agree with this prop. I'm on Ryan's side. However, I think it's something super important in our society today to be able to see opposing sides, to argue opposing arguments. This is why when I got the con ballot, I was actually super excited to argue it. So here's my speech. Hello, my name is Aiden Reading, and I'm going to be arguing on behalf of a con ballot for Proposition 18. I will be negating this resolution of Prop 18 that states 17-year-olds will be allowed to vote in primary or special elections. They will be 18 years old by the general election in November. This is how it is now. 17-year-olds who are US citizens can pre-register to vote in California, and they can vote if they have turned 18 by the election day. Before we start off why Prop 18 should not be passed, let's talk a little bit about the budget for Prop 18. The prop will heavily increase the people who can vote, which will require county election offices to spend a lot more money to send out voter info and ballots, as well as for each election cycle, Prop 18 is said to about cost $1 million extra statewide. Now, into the more important contentions of why Prop 18 should not be passed. To start with contention number 1, being maturity. 17-year-olds who are not legally adults are not yet adults for a reason. They are not mature enough to make important decisions such as making living factors and most importantly, voting. Stated in the editorial on No on Prop 18 from the Press Democrat, the editorial board, it stated, although during this time of growing concern about voter suppression around the country, it may be refreshing to think about promoting participation in our democracy, especially for younger voters. This thought sounds nice in theory, but in the end, it will not work out in our favor. Supporters argue that 17-year-olds are nearly adults and allowing them to vote early could start a lifelong habit. But California allows too many low turnout special elections on fiscal issues. I highly doubt that even the most politically engaged 17-year-olds, such as all of these amazing STF members we see here today, are fully prepared to weigh parcel taxes and bond acts. Even fewer would be subjected to taxes that they would be voted on. Now, into contention number 2. Contention number 2 about cognitive ability and logic. 17-year-old brains are not fully developed in the logic and reasoning portion, so they would just be making bad decisions. From Harvard Med, it says that teenage brains are not fully developed at the age of 17, and the reasoning portions are still developing and growing. How can a 17-year-old vote? I mean vote. Not vote for their favorite side of TikTok, or vote for their favorite ice cream flavor. I mean vote for taxes, vote for school systems, vote for human rights, and vote for elected officials such as the President of our United States. Now, into contention number 3, out of count persuasions. Schools and parents would persuade 17-year-old voters to vote one side or the other by putting up posters or having teachers advocate for certain policies. This is wrong because if students cannot resist the influence of making bad choices at school, such as drugs and alcohol, how can they be anywhere near or 100% of 17-year-old voters vote with their own persuasion and that only? Now, in conclusion, allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primaries on tax issues and debt issuance is not right because they will not have paid taxes on their own. So they will not be biased on who influences them. 17-year-olds are simply just too young to vote and they need to have more life experiences before they are ready to vote. Finally, 17-year-old brains are not fully developed into logic and reasoning portions. These laws that are made for voting don't assure voters' responsibility. The laws don't give them the responsibilities that they are not capable of handling in the first place. After I have proven to you in my contentions of why a 17-year-old is just a simple age too young enough to vote, I highly issue for a nay ballot on Prop 18. Just vote no.
Thank you so much, Aiden, for that speech. Right now, I'll allow Ryan to rebuttal Aiden, then after Aiden can rebuttal Ryan.
Yeah, so I think the main argument from that I'll latch on to is the whole biological case that 17-year-old brains are just not significantly developed to be voting in elections or taking these very serious issues into consideration. And the obvious thing there is that that's a similar argument to the one that was made against allowing women to vote 100 years ago. This idea that not only people would point to science at the time and say that, oh, well, women's brains are just not as well developed as men's brains. But also one popular argument against women's suffrage in the 1920s was that women were a captive audience to their husbands and that they wouldn't know any better than just to be a second vote for their husbands, which we've seen has not been the case. I mean, even if you look at the breakdown of how men and women vote in US elections. And then another thing about, being a 17-year-old and looking at all these local things and not really being able to make a full educated decision or be sufficiently reflective. I don't know if there really is a better time to start voting than when you're at this age between 17 and 18. It's your last few months of high school for the most part, maybe college application season has just ended, the senioritis is setting in, and you're about to head off into the real world. And maybe you wrote all those reflective essays. You've probably spent a lot of time thinking about the future, what it might look like, what you want out of it. So these people who would be fully enfranchised by Prop 18 are, for the most part, reflective and independent and eligible. So, it's hard to imagine a better primary election voter than that.
I understand what you're saying about how it's pre-real world and it's going to get them ready for the real world, but I don't understand how voters can vote for something if they haven't actually experienced those real life experiences, such as voting for taxes, living under the roof by themselves, and even just voting for little state legislation laws as well. And also refuting your point on saying that 18 other states do allow 17-year-olds to vote. We have 50 states in our United States, and if this prop was valid, then it would have been voted on by now than more than 18 states.
So, we don't actually require you to have experience with everything that you vote on. It's a democracy. It doesn't matter. We don't require you to take mental tests, and we don't require you to have experience with certain things to vote. It's a democracy. And I don't know if we have time to go into like the whole history of it, but this whole electoral gray zone thing, it's a relatively recent phenomenon. It's an accident, a glitch that started in the 1970s when all of a sudden 18-year-olds had the right to vote, but also primary elections were adopted in most of the states for the first time. So it's only been about 50 years since the gray zone came into effect, and states have been pretty slow in adopting it, but that's been speeding up in recent years. We have like 3 or 4 other states that are adopting these measures this year.
I would like to say thank you so much to Ryan and Aiden for their amazing debate. And now I would like to welcome back Uchenna to wrap up the evening.
I want to give a big thank you to all of you guys for joining us this evening. Remember, voter registration ends October 19. Tomorrow, the STF team will send you a follow-up email with important resources about how to finalize your voting plan, whether you're voting by mail or in person. We encourage you all to vote as early as possible to be able to avoid delays and ensure that your vote is counted. And as a reminder, STFers can participate in STF's virtual mock election starting tomorrow, Thursday, through October the 22nd. Make sure to keep an eye out for that in your emails. And as always, please remember to exercise your human right to vote and vote for human rights. I want to thank all of you guys and have a lovely evening.